Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Nicole Peets. Nicole Peets was born on February 26, 1973 in King County, Washington. Nicole was the only child in her family and her parents divorced when she was in school. During her high school years, Nicole was an active, sociable, athletic girl who was well-liked by many people. She had many friends and enjoyed field trips to the countryside. After graduating from high school, Nicole studied public relations at Western Washington College. At the same time, Nicole was still actively involved in sports. Nicole took a coaching position at a local sports club. Nicole quickly gained the respect of her colleagues, and Nicole attracted many customers to her classes. After graduating from college, Nicole decided to continue her education to improve her management skills. She found a job at a large mobile communications company. Nicole's personality is friendly, sociable, and willing to help people, but few people know that inside she is suffering from a lot of pain and suffering. Nicole's teenage years were severely affected by alcoholism. The divorce of her parents was a huge shock to her fragile psyche. Her rebellious nature and bad friends influenced her, and she began drinking. All of this led to a serious alcoholism that lasted for many years and completely undermined Nicole's physical and mental health. At that time, Nicole's mother, Gail, worked as a flight attendant and was often away from home because of her busy work. Therefore, Gail did not realize the change in Nicole. Nicole lives with her elderly grandmother, who also did not realize that her granddaughter regularly drank alcohol. When the truth was revealed, alcoholism had caused severe damage to Nicole. To help Nicole, Gail, her mother, accompanied Nicole to support her. Gail accompanied Nicole to therapy and alcoholism meetings, helping Nicole open up and overcome her cravings. At that time, Nicole's mother Gail had remarried, and Gail's new husband, Robert, was supportive of his stepdaughter, loving Nicole like his own daughter and believing that Nicole could overcome her alcoholism. Nicole took treatment very seriously. She did not miss a single meeting and quickly overcame her addiction. However, alcohol caused many health problems for Nicole. She had serious problems with her pancreas that required surgery. In addition, her alcoholism at a young age had seriously affected her fertility, making it impossible for Nicole to have children. In the mid-1990s, when Nicole was recovering from her addiction and living sober again, Nicole met David. At the time, Nicole had just gotten a job at a sports club, and David was a regular at the club. David was a tall, handsome young man. David was immediately attracted to Nicole, an attractive trainer, and David began to show interest in her. David, who was 4 years younger than Nicole, soon developed a relationship that lasted almost 8 years, and it was not until 2002 that the couple decided to marry. David and Nicole had a simple wedding in Hawaii, inviting only their closest friends. After their marriage, the newlyweds bought their own house and began to settle down in the town of Linwood, Washington. Nicole was a friendly and outgoing young woman who quickly made friends and built good relationships with her neighbors. Nicole loved animals and had several dogs. Because she could not have children, Nicole devoted all her love to these pets. David and Nicole were a perfect couple. They often went for walks with their dogs and always had happy smiles on their faces. Nicole loved to cook, and she was a very good cook. Nicole often treated her husband to delicious meals cooked by herself. In 2006, just a few days before her 33rd birthday, Nicole mysteriously disappeared. That day, for the first time, she did not attend an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, where she was the leader and inspiration for the group. Nicole also did not come to work, making her colleagues even more worried. In the evening, her mother, Gail, felt very worried when she could not contact Nicole all day, which had never happened before. Gail called Nicole's husband, David, to find out what was going on. However, David could not contact Nicole either. David said that David and Nicole had argued a little the day before, so when he tried calling Nicole the next day and got no response, he thought that Nicole was still angry with him. David did not rush to find Nicole right away, but waited until the evening to ask for her forgiveness. However, Nicole still did not come home that night. Nicole's family tried to contact her by phone but received no response. They decided to go to the police to report the incident. However, the police did not immediately accept their report because Nicole was an adult and had only been missing for less than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day after Nicole went missing that the police began searching. When Nicole did not appear and her phone was unreachable, the police decided to start searching from where she was last seen, which was her and David's house. However, after investigating, the police did not find any clues or unusual signs that Nicole had been kidnapped or that something had happened to her in that house. And Nicole's car was also missing with her, suggesting that she may have left on her own and did not want to return. Her mother Gail and stepfather Robert did not wait for the police to wait the required time and began the search themselves. They appealed to all concerned through social media to help in the search and share any relevant information about Nicole's location. Nicole's father and mother also took the first flight to Linwood, where they began searching for Nicole themselves, handing out flyers with her photo and asking people who knew her. The police searched for Nicole and her car. They tried to determine the route the car had taken on the day Nicole went missing. But there were no clues. The next morning a man was jogging when he took a shortcut through an area that was very sparsely populated. As he passed through that area, he noticed something strange in the bushes. As he got closer, he realized it was the severely mutilated body of a naked woman. He immediately called the police and reported the incident. The police quickly arrived at the scene. At the scene was the body of a young woman without any clothes on. Based on the number of bruises and scratches, the victim had been brutally beaten. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation with bare hands. The police suspected that the body was Nicole Peets, who had been missing for several days. When Nicole's mother, Gail, went to the morgue to identify the body, Gail fainted when she saw the body, and her husband, Robert, was also very sad. As for Nicole's husband, David, he did not show any signs of grief. This made everyone around David feel a little suspicious of his reaction. The police continued to search for Nicole's car, hoping to find traces of the killer in the car. Information about the missing car was widely publicized in the media, along with a call for people to contact the police if they saw the car. Some time later, a gray Volkswagen Polo was found in a parking lot on the outskirts of town. The security guard there discovered the car when he realized that it had been left there for a long time. At the time, he did not know that the car was involved in this serious murder. The police took the car for inspection and examined it to look for evidence and clues to help track down the criminal. However, after the inspection, they found no traces, except for the fingerprints and DNA traces of Nicole and her husband David. Without finding any concrete evidence, the police returned the car to David. The truth is that Nicole was brutally murdered, but the motive for the crime remains unclear. In addition, the carjacking theory is unlikely, as the car was abandoned shortly after on the other side of town. Nicole Peets' case remains unsolved after nearly a year of investigation. There have been no new leads or leads in the search for the perpetrator. No one saw the suspect leave his car in the parking lot because it was not crowded and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. What is suspicious is that Nicole's case has been kept secret. Information about the investigation and new evidence has not been disclosed to the family. Nicole's relatives have not been fully updated, only receiving small details. Nicole's bank card was used at a gas station after she went missing. Although the police have collected images from the cameras, they have not yet disclosed the results of the investigation. When Nicole's case did not progress and the perpetrator was still at large, Nicole's parents decided to conduct an investigation themselves. They hired a private investigator to gather information, verify some suspicions, and offer a reward for anyone who could provide useful information. The reward was initially $10,000 and later increased to $35,000, but no new leads were found. David initially showed great interest in investigating Nicole's disappearance for the first 6 months. However, after that time, he began to distance himself and had little contact with his in-laws, and David eventually remarried and had children of his own. The news of David's remarriage and children of his own came as a huge shock to Nicole's mother, Gail, because Nicole was unable to have children and was often blamed by David. A grief-stricken Gail repeatedly hinted that the culprit might be her son-in-law. 6 years later, Nicole's case took an unexpected turn. David was arrested as the prime suspect in the case. David did not expect that he himself would be the focus of this investigation. Previously, David had changed his residence and lost contact with Nicole's family, so he thought that the case was over and no one was looking for him. However, David was very surprised when the police raided and arrested him. At that time, David even declared his innocence and was willing to take a lie detector test, but he failed the test. As for the police, they suspected David from the beginning, but lacked concrete evidence. In order to arrest David, the police gathered a lot of evidence to ensure that he was responsible for the crime. In fact, David himself probably thought that he had committed the crime perfectly and would never be discovered. A video from the gas station provided an important clue. Footage of the moment a man paid with Nicole's card showed that the man looked similar to David. Although the man was wearing a hat and sunglasses, making identification more difficult, the footage was a key clue in the case. Police also discovered that Nicole was not wearing her wedding ring. Nicole never left the house without it. Initially, police thought the ring had been stolen with other items, but the box containing the ring was later found on a dressing table in Nicole's home. Police discovered a mouth guard in Nicole's mouth during the autopsy. This was a device Nicole had been prescribed shortly before the tragedy, as she suffered from uncontrollable spasms of her chewing muscles due to anxiety, which led to worn enamel and chipped teeth. The presence of this device suggested that Nicole may have been murdered while she was still asleep in her bed. It is possible that David had forgotten that his wife was using a mouth guard because she had only recently started using it. In addition, the police examined the traces left in Nicole's car. Only David's and Nicole's fingerprints were found in the car. No traces of anyone else were found, suggesting that there was no third person involved in the murder. The investigation also shed light on Nicole and David's family situation at the time. David did not hold any permanent jobs and preferred to spend his time in bars and clubs, where David spent all of Nicole's earnings on alcohol and other women. The family was facing serious financial problems, and the situation became worse over time. Nicole tried to convince David to change his lifestyle and attend alcohol rehabilitation meetings to help David get back on track. However, David's response was indifferent and insulting. David had affairs with many women. Nicole's mother Gail knew about the serious problems in Nicole's family and tried to convince Nicole to leave David. However, Nicole did not want to do so because she loved David and hoped he would change. After Nicole's death, her husband David quickly received a large insurance payout and started a new relationship. Before that, David had been having an affair with a girl named Jane for several months. David often spent time with her at bars and clubs when Nicole was busy working or studying. Before Nicole's birthday, David brought his mistress home, where they were caught by Nicole. This incident became the cause of an argument in the family. Nicole told her mother about the incident, and a few days later, she mysteriously disappeared. Because Gail knew everything, she suspected David from the beginning. However, the police said that the evidence collected was too little to arrest the suspect. The case was kept secret and the family was never heard from again. When David received a large insurance payout after Nicole's death, he spent the money with his mistress, Jane. David appeared in court in September 2013 for his crimes. David received the maximum sentence possible under the laws of the state where the case was tried. David served 18 years in prison. However, in 2025, he could be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Doreen Herbert. Doreen Herbert was born on November 29, 1952, in California. She grew up in a very large family of 5 children. Her kindness and desire to help others defined her as a person. After college, she moved to San Francisco, where she worked as a physiotherapist. Doreen also nurtured a dream of creating her own large family. This aspiration became a reality when she met Michael Dennis, who worked near her clinic. They began dating, got married, and in 1976, their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy, but the birth of their child marked the beginning of their marital troubles. A year later, they decided to go their separate ways, with their son staying with Doreen and Michael receiving regular visitation rights. Doreen and her family were still able to maintain a fairly stable life despite the many hardships they faced. She met Charles, and they started dating, eventually getting married and settling in a quiet neighborhood in San Jose. They was thrilled when their daughter Diana was born in 1979. Charles was eager to be a father and was delighted to welcome Diana, raising her alongside Doreen's son from a previous relationship. Tragedy struck in February 1980 when disaster befell their young family. 4-year-old Paul slipped through the fence surrounding their backyard pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, discovered what had happened too late. She immediately pulled Paul from the water and called for emergency services. Paul was rushed to the hospital and connected to life support, but after 10 agonizing days, the medical team concluded that he had no chance of recovery. The heartbreaking decision was made to disconnect Paul from life support. Doreen was heartbroken and consumed by guilt, despite the police investigation clearing her of any blame. However, with the help of her young daughter, she slowly began to heal. For years after the traumatic event, the family finally received some good news. After 2 previous miscarriages, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything seemed to be going smoothly. They was expecting a baby boy, due to arrive in early November. Just days before Doreen's scheduled hospital visit, the family decided to participate in Halloween festivities. On the evening of October 31st, the neighborhood was filled with decorated homes, children trick-or-treating, and parents handing out candy. Diana, now 4 years old, was excited to join in and her parents agreed. Although Doreen was 9 months pregnant, she accompanied her daughter on the trick-or-treating adventure, while Charles stayed home to hand out candy to other children. Charles and his wife, Doreen, had returned home from taking their daughter trick-or-treating. Just before 9 p.m., noticing they were running low on candy, Charles decided to make a quick trip to the nearby store to restock. At around 8:50 p.m., he left the house, leaving his wife and daughter behind. 15 minutes later, he returned home to find the front door slightly ajar, which seemed suspicious. As he entered the house, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife, Doreen, lay on the floor in the corridor, surrounded by a large amount of blood and showed no signs of life. Charles immediately called 911. In the living room, he then found the body of their unborn child. Charles was in shock, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. At first he wondered if Doreen had had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized that something much more serious had happened. Next to their unborn child lay Doreen's severed hand, making it clear to Charles that his family had been attacked. Fearing for his daughter's safety, he frantically searched for her. There was so much blood on the floor that he slipped and fell while running through the house. Eventually, he found his daughter hiding behind the sofa in the living room. She is still alive and unhurt. When paramedics arrived, they found Doreen's weak pulse and rushed her to the hospital. Tragically, Doreen did not survive and was pronounced dead in the ambulance. Her unborn child also did not survive. The attacker had inflicted severe injuries on the baby after removing it from Doreen's womb. A post-mortem examination revealed that Doreen had been stabbed multiple times with a long, sharp object, possibly a sword or machete. The crime scene was particularly disturbing, with blood covering the floors, walls, and ceiling. Police officers at the scene were deeply affected by what they witnessed. Despite a thorough search of the house, no signs of the perpetrator or any evidence were found. However, investigators did discover bloody footprints leading from the house to the middle of the road, suggesting that the killer may have escaped in a vehicle. Soon, investigators found another crucial piece of evidence on the lawn in front of the house, a wolf mask covered in blood. They believed it might belong to the killer, as Charles reported they didn't own such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory for analysis. And police attempted to question Diana, who was the only witness in this incident. Although shaken and in complete shock, Diana provided valuable details about what happened. She explained that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. When Doreen answered, she saw a man wearing a wolf mask and holding a long blade. He threatened to kill her, and Doreen immediately screamed at Diana to run out of the house. Diana hid behind the sofa but couldn't recall what happened next until her father found her. Initially, the police found it suspicious that the victim's husband, Charles, had left for the store just minutes before the killer arrived. This coincidence led investigators to consider him as a potential suspect. When Charles returned home, he unknowingly stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Despite this, Diana was unable to help identify the attacker due to the wolf mask. Police initially considered the possibility that Charles might have intentionally gotten blood on his clothes to create an alibi. However, detectives quickly discovered several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes did not match the bloody footprints found on the street. Secondly, the killer likely escaped in a car parked in front of the house, but no blood was found in Charles's vehicle, nor was a different pair of shoes discovered. To investigate further, police went to the store that Charles had visited that evening and spoke to the staff there. They confirmed that Charles had indeed purchased candy from him. This established an alibi for Charles, as he didn't have enough time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store supported Charles's account, leading detectives to temporarily rule him out as the prime suspect. They then asked Charles if he knew of anyone who might want to harm his family. Charles immediately pointed out Michael, Doreen's ex-husband. According to Charles, Michael's behavior changed dramatically after the death of their son, who had drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen for the boy's death, believing she had deliberately killed Paul to cut ties with him. Michael filed a lawsuit against his ex-wife Doreen, holding her responsible for the death of Paul, but lost the case. Their marriage had been troubled even before their divorce. After the birth of their son, Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic, often withdrawing into depression and distancing himself from his family. Doreen suspected that Michael's childhood traumas were to blame. As a child, Michael had hearing problems and wore a bulky hearing aid, which earned him constant teasing from his peers. This led to him growing up as an introvert with few friends and a fear of interacting with women. Although his relationship with Doreen seemed to have helped him overcome these issues, they eventually resurfaced and contributed to their decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began to resent her, particularly for the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings became even worse after Paul's death. made Michael hate his ex-wife even more. Michael has also been unemployed for a long time, which had a significant impact on him. After considering this information, the detectives decided to visit Michael's house to speak with him. Although Charles's statement alone was not enough to make Michael the main suspect. The fact that Michael lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house prompted the detectives to pay him a visit immediately. The officers arrived at Michael's home around midnight and noticed a pickup truck parked near the garage. When police shined their flashlights on Michael's car, they saw blood on the steering wheel and keys. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Lights were still on inside the house and they could hear running water, leading them to suspect that Michael might be destroying evidence or washing bloody clothes. They continued knocking until Michael opened the door. Michael remained calm, even after being informed Doreen's murder. Michael answered the officers' questions calmly and allowed them to enter his house without a warrant. He claimed that he had gone to the store earlier that day, returned home, and hadn't left since. He even agreed to sign a form allowing the police to search his home. However, as he reached for the pen to sign, officers noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael explained that he had accidentally cut himself while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, but the police were skeptical of his story. The wound was fresh, with blood still seeping out. As officers searched the house, Michael accompanied one of them upstairs to retrieve his ID. However, when Michael reached for the bed headboard, the officer intervened, sensing suspicious behavior. Why would Michael store his documents behind the bed? Curiosity led the police to conduct a deeper investigation. Upon approaching the bed, they spotted a holster attached to the headboard, containing a loaded gun. The officer confiscated the weapon and escorted Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, the officers discovered a trail of blood droplets leading from the house to the garage. And they found a washing machine and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This evidence is enough to arrest Michael. A thorough search of the house by detectives and forensic experts followed, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. Although the blood analysis would take a few days, the police made some disturbing discoveries. They found an empty box for an 18-inch machete. Medical experts confirmed that the wounds from this knife matched the actual wounds found on Doreen's body. During the investigation, police found 2 makeshift coffins in Michael's house, leading them to believe that he was planning to harm his ex-wife, Doreen, and her husband. The presence of medical body bags at his home was also suspicious. As detectives pieced together the evidence, they went to a judge to request a warrant for Michael's arrest. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence, they were initially only able to hold him for a limited time. When the judge refused to issue an arrest warrant, citing insufficient circumstantial evidence to convict Michael, he was released from prison. But detectives eventually got vital information from the autopsy results. Experts discovered that the crime scene had blood from 2 individuals. One blood type was identified as Doreen's, and the other was Michael's. This evidence suggested that Michael had likely injured himself while attacking Doreen. With this new evidence, the judge quickly issued a warrant for Michael's arrest, charged him with the murder of Doreen and her unborn child. In addition, detectives discovered that Michael owned a wolf mask identical to the one found near Doreen's house the previous Halloween. Further inquiry revealed that Michael had worn the mask to a party, and a photograph of him wearing it was even obtained by police. To validate this, detectives searched Michael's home and found the same clothing he wore in the photo. To search for new clues to the case, the police interviewed Doreen's neighbors about the incidents that happened that night. Several children who were trick-or-treating reported seeing a man wearing a wolf mask standing across from Doreen's house, eyeing it intensely. This sighting occurred around 7 p.m., a full 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial commenced in July 1988, 4 years after the crime. He initially pleaded guilty but later changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. A psychologist evaluated Michael and diagnosed him with severe mental health issues. Michael claimed that the horror of Halloween was too much to bear, as the sight of children trick or treating reminded him of his own loss and triggered a mental breakdown. He alleged that this breakdown led him to visit Doreen's house armed with a machete on the evening of the murder. When Doreen opened the door, Michael revealed his true identity as the man behind the mask and made a shocking statement: she killed their son. Recognizing the man as Michael, Doreen quickly screamed for her daughter to run and Michael immediately attacked her. Michael claimed he was unaware that Doreen was pregnant at the time of the attack, but this assertion was met with skepticism. Doreen was visibly pregnant, standing at 4 feet 1 inches tall, and her friends found it hard to believe that Michael wouldn't have noticed, especially given her prominent belly. In fact, her friends joked that her pregnancy had made her almost as wide as she was tall. The prosecution argued that Michael was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance, a claim supported by evidence from the investigation. Detectives discovered that Michael had previously shared his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband with friends, and had even discussed disposing of their bodies in the bay. The presence of 2 coffins and body bags in his home suggested that he was serious about carrying out this plan, and the prosecution argued that he had adjusted his intentions for some reason to target Doreen instead. Michael may have panicked or feared being caught, prompting him to leave the house quickly. During the trial, Doreen's 9-year-old daughter, Diana, testified about what she witnessed. Charles had wanted to spare his daughter the traumatic experience, but she was the only witness to the crime. The trial lasted a year, ultimately resulting in Michael's conviction for the murders of Doreen and her unborn child. Michael was sentenced to death, but a moratorium on the death penalty in California delayed his execution. As a result, Michael remains in prison, and his sentence will be no carried out. Years later, Diana revealed that the murder had such a profound effect on her, and she could never forget the horror she witnessed. Ultimately, Diana decides to forgive Michael and try to move past the past to focus on the future. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sumner family. Carol and Reggie Sumner raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were born in the same year, went to the same school, and were even in the same grade. Over time, their childhood friendship blossomed into a deeper affection. Neither of them recalls exactly when they began to develop romantic feelings for each other, but by the time they were 15 years old in 1959, they were dating. Their friends described them as a beautiful and harmonious couple. Reggie and Carol treasured their memories, keeping photos of their happy times together in their home archives. At the time, it seemed like they had their whole lives ahead of them, and they looked forward to a long and happy future together. Their feelings for each other were strong and mutual, and they were practically inseparable both in and out of school. They even started making plans to get married as soon as they turned 18, with the full support of their parents. In 1962, Reggie and Carol, a young couple, graduated from high school. However, their plans to get married were put on hold when Reggie was drafted into the Army a few months later. They decided to postpone their wedding until Reggie returned from his military service and made a promise to write each other regularly. As time passed, the separation took its toll. Reggie was deployed to Vietnam. Unfortunately, Carol lost contact with him, and she didn't even know if he was still alive. Despite the uncertainty, Carol continued her education and started working at the Charleston Air Force Base. A few years later, Carol got married, but the marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. They didn't have any children together. In 1975, Carol married again, this time to Richard Alford, and gave birth to their daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. However, this marriage was also troubled, as Richard was abusive and had a drinking problem. The situation became unbearable for Carol. And by the mid-1980s, she couldn't take the abuse anymore. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard refused to leave her alone and continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, Richard purchased a handgun and ammunition. After a night of heavy drinking, he went to his ex-wife Carol's home, intending to confront her. When Carol answered the door, their 10-year-old daughter Rhonda was present in the room. However, the presence of his child did not deter Richard, who was intoxicated. He pulled out the gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. Richard then drove to a secluded area, where he fired the remaining bullet into his temple, taking his own life. Carol was fortunate to survive the shooting due to the prompt response of neighbors, who heard the gunshots and Rhonda's cries for help. They called the police and an ambulance, which rushed Carol to the hospital. Carol's condition was critical, and she underwent several complex surgeries and blood transfusions. Although she eventually recovered, she suffered significant injuries, including complete blindness in her right eye and permanent disability. Years later, in the late 1990s, Carol's health began to deteriorate again. She experienced severe pain, weight loss, and weakness. After a thorough examination at the hospital, she received a devastating diagnosis: liver cancer. Tragically, as a result of being severely injured by gunshot wounds, Carol lost her position on an Air Force base. With cancer added to her medical complications, she found that physical strain, prolonged periods on her feet, and any heavy physical exertion exceeded her capability. Given these medical constraints, Carol then decided to re-enter the workforce as a call center operator for a cable television provider within her hometown, Charleston. Reggie was in Vietnam for a long time, and due to the prolonged war, he was severely wounded and nearly lost his leg. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and during this period, his name was mistakenly listed among the dead. As a result, his relatives believed he had passed away. Reggie was fortunate to survive and eventually returned home. However, by then, he had lost touch with his former lover, Carol, who had moved to a different location, gotten married, and also assumed Reggie had died in the war. Years later, Reggie got married, but his war injuries led to the development of diabetes and other chronic diseases. He was never able to become a father, and eventually, his marriage ended in separation. Since then, he has lived alone. Reggie found work as a laborer at the local railroad and no longer expected any pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, Carol was having a typical day at work, answering phones and advising customers. When she picked up another call, she was shocked to hear a voice that sent shivers down her spine. It was a voice she knew all too well, her first high school love, Reggie. However, she was hesitant to respond, as she had thought Reggie was dead. After answering the customer's questions, Carol mustered up the courage to say Reggie's full name out loud. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Reggie's timid question. Carol burst into tears, revealing that she was she he had dated in high school, the one he had once wanted to marry. For several minutes, they both cried, unable to speak. Eventually, they composed themselves and discovered that they still lived in their hometown. They agreed to meet the next evening, reuniting after all these years. The next day, Carol spent hours getting ready for the date, trying on different dresses and perfecting her hair and makeup. As she looked in the mirror, she was reminded that time had changed her. She was no longer the young, vibrant woman Reggie remembered from the past. Still, she was eager to win him over once more. Their meeting was thrilling for both, having spent decades apart, and their conversation was unrelenting as they recounted stories from their lives, both happy and sorrowful, covering their previous marriages. Professional triumphs, struggles, health challenges, and basking in nostalgia as they reflected on their lost romance and first true love for one another. Reggie and Carol were determined to make the most of their reunion after a period of separation. They quickly fell into a routine of spending every day together, and within a couple of weeks, they decided to take the next step by moving in together. Just 5 months later, they got married, and Carol joined her husband in his home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. As they settled into family life, they initially resided in their hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. They were deeply in love, happy, and enthusiastic about building a life together. However, they faced some challenges, particularly with their health, as they were both still young but struggling with health issues. One of the neighbors who lived nearby was the Cole family, with whom Reggie had a long-standing acquaintance. The patriarch of the family, Stephen, had experienced firsthand the traumatic effects of the Vietnam War. Sustaining severe wounds during combat had resulted in confinement to a wheelchair for many years. His wife, Natalie, often prioritized her social life, spending time with friends at bars after work, instead of rushing home to take care of her family. As a result, their daughter, Tiffany, found herself frequently neglected and left unattended from a young age. Tiffany's situation improved slightly when she befriended the new neighbors, Reggie and Carol. During this time, Tiffany was still in high school, and the compassionate Carol took an instant liking to she. Carol felt genuine sympathy for Tiffany. For 5 years, Carol did her best to support and care for Tiffany, sometimes sponsoring cozy family meals, buying Tiffany clothes, and sharing enough allowance. Carol treated Tiffany like a daughter, showering her with love, care, and attention. When the Carol and Reggie decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan in 2004, Tiffany asked to buy it from them on an installment plan, as she desperately needed a car but had no money. They kindly offered to sell it to her for a minimal amount, which they divided into 12 monthly payments. In early 2005, Carol and Reggie made a difficult decision to leave their home and relocate to Florida. Their health had begun to decline significantly, and doctors advised them to move to a warmer climate with ocean access. Since Carol and Reggie were both retired, they decided to make a big change and start over. Carol and Reggie sold their large home in Charleston and bought a new place in Jacksonville, Florida. They also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. They was very happy and settled into their new life, making plans for their future together. Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda every day to share her thoughts, plans, and daily experiences. However, in June 2005, Rhonda was surprised and concerned when her mother didn't call her as usual. At first, Rhonda tried to brush off her worries, hoping that everything was fine with her parents and that they would call her back soon. But when the next day passed without hearing from them, Rhonda's concern grew. She tried calling her parents' cell phones every 30 minutes, but they were now out of service. She also left messages on their home phone, but none of them were returned. Rhonda set out on a solo road trip to check on her mother and stepfather in another state. After a 5-hour drive, she arrived at their house. What struck her as unusual was the absence of a car in the driveway. Things only got stranger from there. As she approached the front door, she found it slightly ajar, an eerie quietness, and a light on in one of the rooms despite the bright sunlight outside. Rhonda called out for her mother and stepfather Reggie, but received no response. She ventured into the kitchen, where she was greeted by a scene that looked like a sudden and mysterious departure. A table was set for two, with food that appeared to have been left untouched for days. The rest of the house was also in disarray, with belongings scattered about and doors and cupboards left open. Adding to the sense of abandonment and unease, their bedroom showed signs of a thorough search, but it was unclear what the person was looking for or who was responsible. On the bedside table, essential medications were left behind, including her mother's cancer pills, which she took 3 times a day, and Reggie's insulin, which he administered hourly. Notably, their cell phones were completely out of battery, rendering them useless. Rhonda quickly realized that her mother and stepfather were unable to leave their home without their essential medications and cell phones. She immediately contacted the police to report the incident, alerting them to the suspicious individuals. They in the car was quickly added to the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and Reggie were frozen. The first few days of the search yielded nothing, with no sign of the imposters or any witnesses. However, on June 12, several developments led the police to close in on the perpetrators. A crucial lead emerged when a man, claiming to be Reggie, contacted one of the banks, complaining that his card was blocked and he was unable to withdraw cash. A bank employee grew suspicious when checking the card information and offered to resolve the issue by visiting a nearby branch, but the caller, Mr. Reggie, hung up. Minutes later, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carroll, and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When the bank asked her to visit a branch in person, she refused, citing health issues, and urgently requested access to her savings. Her request was denied. The bank promptly handed over the call details and recordings to the police. The police investigation continued at the station, where they played the suspicious phone calls for Rhonda. She immediately confirmed that the voices did not belong to her Carol and Reggie. In fact, the voices sounded too young to be them. As a result, the authorities believed that the imposters were likely involved in the Carol and Reggie disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after extracting information about their bank accounts and cards. The search for the missing couple led to a breakthrough a few days later, when their car was discovered abandoned on a remote road in a wooded area. A thorough examination of the vehicle revealed no signs of blood or struggle in the cabin. However, in the trunk, experts found hair and sweat marks that belonged to they. This suggested that they had been forcibly taken away in the trunk of their own car, leaving little hope for their safe return. The police investigated their bank transactions and found that money had been withdrawn from their account several times after they stopped hearing from their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage revealed that the withdrawals were made by a young man who couldn't be identified right away. The police also requested a trace of all calls made from the phone number used by the imposters to contact the bank. Further investigation showed that the SIM card used to make those calls was purchased on a prepaid plan just before they disappeared. Unfortunately, the buyer's identity couldn't be determined, but it was discovered that the number was used to call a car rental company on June 6. Additionally, it was found that someone staying at a hotel had rented a Mazda RX-8 in the name of Tiffany Cole. Later, the same car was seen at the ATMs where the unidentified young man withdrew money from their accounts. A team of investigators used tracking beacons installed in rental cars to locate a Mazda RX-8, which was found parked at a hotel in Charleston. The car was linked to a couple who had been victimized by thieves, who had withdrawn $1,000 from her card and nearly $3,000 from her husband's card. A capture team was quickly dispatched to the hotel, where they burst into the room where the thieves were staying. The room was found to be filled with numerous packages and receipts from various stores, indicating that the thieves had been on a spending spree, purchasing items such as clothing, electronics, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive liquor. 3 people were found inside the location, clearly caught off guard by the police visit. Tiffany Cole, 23, her boyfriend Michael Jackson, 24, and Alan Lindell Wade, 19, all appeared surprised, confused, and frightened as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. The trio was taken to the police station, separated into different rooms for questioning, and initially pretended to be unaware of the accusations or refused to speak. A search of the premises uncovered significant evidence, including stolen bank cards, the laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, Reggie's expensive coin collection, the keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in Tiffany Cole's name. During the investigation, it was discovered that Tiffany had sold some of the stolen jewelry and spent the money with friends. After several hours of interrogation, Tiffany finally began to talk, bursting into tears as she confessed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple but claimed no further harm was done. The group then went on the run, using the stolen money for their own gain. Tiffany also implicated another individual, Bruce Kent Nixon, 19, who was paid $300 for his assistance in the crime. She stated that they never saw Bruce Kent Nixon again after the incident. Bruce Kent Nixon's decision to commit a crime was motivated by a promise of a fixed amount of money, which he quickly spent on illicit substances. As a result, he did not make an effort to hide or flee, living in the same city of Charleston. He was eventually arrested at his parents' home. It began in May 2005, when Tiffany visited the Summers to make a payment on a car she had purchased 6 months prior. The Summers, Carol, and Reggie were known for their hospitality and would often invite Tiffany to stay overnight or for a few days, treating her to good food and gifts. On this particular occasion, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend, and they were both welcomed to dinner and invited to stay overnight. During dinner, the Summers discussed their new life, and Carol inadvertently revealed that they had nearly $100,000 left over from the sale of their Charleston home, which they intended to use to enjoy their retirement without financial worries. Unbeknownst to her, Carol's careless comment sealed her in her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a telling glance, and that night, they began secretly plotting to get their hands on the Summers' substantial sum of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid they farewell and returned to South Carolina. Within a couple of weeks, they recruited accomplices and assigned roles and responsibilities. They then set their plan in motion. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an unassuming car. Meanwhile, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to the outskirts of Jacksonville, where they identified a secluded spot in the woods and started digging a deep hole, which would ultimately become the Summers' grave. On the morning of July 8th, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store, which she later provided to her accomplices, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan. That evening, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan approached the home of their intended victim, pretending to need assistance and asking to use the phone. Despite finding the young men suspicious, the homeowner, Carol, allowed them to enter. As soon as they were inside, they attacked Carol and her husband, who had rushed to her aid, threatening them with a toy gun. The Carol and Reggie was then bound with duct tape, blindfolded, and interrogated about the location of valuable items in the house, including their bank account information and PIN codes. They provided this information in an attempt to save their lives, as they were subjected to torture and death threats. After obtaining the necessary details, 2 additional individuals entered the house, assisting in dragging the Carol and Reggie into the backyard. They was then forced into the trunk of their own car, a Lincoln, which was being driven by Alan and Bruce Kent Nixon. Following behind them in a rented Mazda ARX-8 were Tiffany and Michael. The plan was that if a police patrol intercepted the car carrying the captive couple, a second car would draw the officers' attention away by recklessly speeding or breaking traffic rules. However, no police were encountered, and both cars reached their destination without incident. In the trunk, Reggie managed to free his arm and remove the bandages and duct tape covering his and his wife's faces, allowing them to breathe. However, there was no time to make any further attempts to escape. As the trunk lid opened, the Carol and Reggie was shocked and bewildered to see among their kidnappers Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had visited them recently. The kidnappers led the captive Carol and Reggie several dozen meters through the woods to a pre-dug grave. The Carol and Reggie begged for mercy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The young kidnappers brutally murdered them by burying them alive. According to Bruce Kent Nixon, the kidnappers spent about an hour burying the Carol and Reggie under earth. Throughout the horrific ordeal, the bound and helpless Carol and Reggie cried, confessed their love for each other, and said their goodbyes. The investigation revealed that the spouses had died from suffocation, with soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs, indicating they had been buried alive. After committing the heinous crime, the perpetrators abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They then went to the Sumner house, where they stole all the valuables they could find, before returning to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their freedom was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all participants in the crime were arrested 4 days later. During the trial, Bruce Kent Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and cooperated with the investigation, hoping for a lighter sentence. He led the authorities to the burial site of the spouses and provided a detailed account of the events of that fateful night. In contrast, Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, was the mastermind behind the crime, driven by greed after learning about the large sum of money the Sumner family had received from the sale of their house. Tiffany's lawyer argued that she was merely an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder. Michael and Alan chose not to testify, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The jury did not believe Tiffany Cole was innocent because she was involved in planning the crime, rented a car, and created a diversion in case they were chased by police. She also helped dig a grave for the victims and sold stolen items at a pawn shop, using the money to buy clothes and rent a limousine to celebrate their success, as seen in numerous photos. As a result, Bruce Kent Nixon was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Michael Jackson, Tiffany, and Alan Lindell were given the death penalty. The criminals filed multiple appeals, but they were all denied, and the sentence remained unchanged. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind and loving young woman. Lindsay had a deep-seated need for connection and love. Her major misstep was that she misjudged her partner and invested herself in their toxic relationship. Lindsay was 17 when she found out she was pregnant. Growing up in a loving and supportive family, she had never expected to become a mother so young. Although she was emotionally mature, what made it even more difficult was that her boyfriend, whom she had been dating since she was 13, abandoned her as soon as he learned he was going to be a father. His sudden departure left Lindsay feeling both upset and scared. Lindsay was all too familiar with the physical and financial strains of motherhood. Her family, the Wilsons, were loving and close-knit, but they had often struggled to make ends meet. Despite their financial challenges, Lindsay's parents had always worked hard to provide for their children. When Lindsay met Mitchell, 5 months into her pregnancy, she felt like she had been given a rare gift. Mitchell, who was 20 years old at the time, was attentive, caring, and gentle. What impressed Lindsay most was that her pregnancy didn't deter him. Instead, he was eager to be involved and supportive. Mitchell told Lindsay that he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, raising her child as his own. To show his commitment, Mitchell began working overtime to ensure that Lindsay and their unborn child would not have to worry about anything. 20-year-old Mitchell was a true gentleman. He was attentive and loving to Lindsay, despite her delicate condition. In fact, Mitchell had fallen deeply in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, including raising her child as his own. At the time, Mitchell was earning a good income. However, when they announced their decision to get married, their parents were shocked. They felt that their 5-week relationship was too short to withstand the challenges and circumstances that came with marriage. Despite their concerns, Lindsay relatives noticed a positive change in her since being with Mitchell. She had regained her cheerfulness and good health. However, some of them found Mitchell's behavior to be a bit insincere. Nevertheless, no one interfered with their decision to get married, and instead chose to keep their doubts to themselves. The wedding took place in August 1995, surrounded by a small, intimate group of family and friends, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's side was noticeably underrepresented, with only his parents, a brother, and 2 friends in attendance. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, Lindsay relatives couldn't shake off their uneasy feelings about the union. However, Lindsay herself was over the moon, believing she had found her perfect match. As the evening wore on, their happiness was short-lived. A disagreement erupted, and the newlyweds' argument played out in front of their guests. The reason for Mitchell's outburst seemed trivial, and his reaction was disproportionately intense. The situation escalated, with Mitchell grasping Lindsay's hand and violently shaking her, leaving everyone in attendance stunned and uncomfortable. Mitchell appeared agitated and threatening, causing concern. When he calmed down, he apologized to everyone and made light of the situation, attributing his behavior to holiday stress. Although Lindsay didn't think much of the incident at the time and soon forgot about it, it was actually one of the warning signs of their toxic relationship. After getting married, Mitchell and Lindsay moved into an apartment in Southport, away from their parents. They started their life together and soon welcomed a baby girl named Robin. However, Lindsay soon discovered that her husband had a volatile temper, which cast a shadow over the joy of their new family. Mitchell's moods were unpredictable. One moment he was happy and joking, and the next, he would become aggressive and unreasonable. She thought she was maintaining a delicate balance at home, but in reality, she was giving in to his control. He dictates her every move and gets angry if she misses a phone call or doesn't pick up. Their arguments often ended with Mitchell begging for forgiveness and declaring his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had been restored, but their cycle of arguments became more and more intense. Lindsay struggled to recognize who she once loved. She frequently shared her concerns with her relatives, who urged her to leave the relationship and end her suffering. However, Lindsay found it difficult to acknowledge her mistake and admit defeat. Lindsay's relatives noticed that she often dwelled on memories of the past. Whenever her husband promised to change and return to his gentle and caring ways, Lindsay wanted to believe him and waited for him to fulfill his promises. Meanwhile, Mitchell's controlling behavior intensified. He restricted Lindsay's freedom, forbidding her from going out alone in the evenings and eventually requiring her to be accompanied by him at all times. Despite his possessiveness, Mitchell was seen with other women, sparking Lindsay's suspicions of infidelity. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her concerns, sharing an incident where a woman visited their home, unaware that Mitchell was married. This revelation led to another argument, which escalated into physical violence. Physical abuse gradually became a part of Lindsay's life. To control her and protect his reputation, Mitchell started limiting her interactions with others. He began by restricting her contact with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and eventually with her family. Lindsay, unhappy and fearful of being caught and punished, tried to secretly maintain contact with her loved ones. Despite the problems in their relationship, Lindsay stayed with Mitchell. One reason was the comfortable life he provided. He had a good income, supported her and their child, and paid the bills, leaving her without any financial worries. Lindsay's life changed dramatically when she found herself pregnant again. Although her husband, Mitchell, was a good father to her daughter from a previous relationship, she felt that having another child would be unwise in their current circumstances. She decided to have an abortion. When Mitchell found out about her decision, he became furious and verbally and physically abused her. Lindsay packed her belongings and took her daughter to her parents' home. Her family was relieved to see her. At first, Lindsay was happy to be apart from her husband, Mitchell. But over time, she started to miss him. Mitchell, eager to win her back, would call her constantly, begging her to return. Despite initial reservations, Lindsay was eventually won over by Mitchell's claims that he had changed. Everything seems to be back to normal. They are even looking forward to another child. However, their happiness was short-lived. After 6 months, Mitchell's violent temper flared up again. Although he didn't harm Lindsay, who was pregnant at the time, he unleashed his fury on their apartment. He smashed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and damaged the walls. He even threw their television out the window and vandalized their car. The landlord, fed up with the destruction, demanded that they pay for the damages and move out. The family's financial situation became even more dire. As a result, they was forced to take out a significant loan and downsize to a smaller, more modest apartment. In October 1997, Lindsay gave birth to their son, Jack. Mitchell was overjoyed at the arrival of his child. However, the relationship between the spouses continued to deteriorate over time. Mitchell often left home for extended periods, sometimes for just a few days, sometimes for an entire week, frequently citing trivial or made-up reasons. Although Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, she eventually reached her breaking point and filed for divorce, returning to her parents' home when Mitchell abandoned her once again. Lindsay realized she couldn't handle the separation from Mitchell on her own, so she reached out to a local charity that supports women in crisis. The charity helped her find affordable housing in a different city, allowing her to start fresh. However, she was worried that Mitchell would find out her new contact information, so she took steps to protect herself. When Mitchell began making threats, she took it a step further and got a restraining order from the police. With the help of a therapist, Lindsay started rebuilding her life. She kept a journal to document her experiences, intending to use it as a warning for her children in the future, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes she did. The journal entries supported what her relatives had said about the problems within the family. Unfortunately, despite her efforts to stay hidden, Mitchell eventually discovered her phone number and began calling her constantly, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, now free, soon felt lonely and couldn't resist her ex's persistence. They started talking and seeing each other again, eventually moving back in together. Ashamed of her weakness, Lindsay kept this a secret, but it eventually came out. Her relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by her reunion with he they considered a tyrant, and they couldn't understand why she had taken him back. Her relatives continued to dislike Mitchell and cut off most communication with him. Despite their efforts to help her, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. As a result, her loved ones eventually gave up trying to save her, accepting the situation and distancing themselves. This time, however, Lindsay's decision would prove to have devastating consequences. After Lindsay disclosed her situation, a social worker began monitoring the young family. However, the social worker reported that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband, Mitchell, would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. Despite the social worker's repeated requests to speak directly with Lindsay, Mitchell would make excuses and prevent her from doing so. The social worker would leave her contact information, but Lindsay never returned her calls. The social worker became concerned for Lindsay's safety and requested a welfare check. When law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, they too were unable to speak with Lindsay. Mitchell claimed that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but he did not consider her missing. Mitchell said that Lindsay participated in a party with a friend on Christmas Eve, returning home early in the morning somewhat intoxicated. This led to an argument with Mitchell. Following the argument, Lindsay packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. Mitchell claimed Lindsay had left him for another man and no longer wanted to have any contact with him. Mitchell's subsequent media appearances sparked widespread attention. He presented himself as a worried and abandoned husband, pleading for Lindsay to return. However, during these interviews, he also shared intimate details about their marriage, occasionally speaking negatively about his wife. Mitchell believes that Lindsay's actions stemmed from a desire for a lavish lifestyle. He said to have seen her driving an expensive car, which he thought was proof that she had left their children for a wealthy man. Despite her public image, Mitchell was enjoying the freedom of a single life. The search for Lindsay began with conversations with her relatives. During these conversations, it was learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th. At that time, she appeared to be in high spirits and looking well, with her behavior being normal. During their investigation, detectives were surprised that no one had expressed concern about the young wife's whereabouts for 2 months. However, they soon discovered a plausible explanation. Mitchell had a history of limiting his wife's interactions with others, even close relatives. In the past, her family had difficulty staying in touch with her due to Mitchell's controlling behavior, which made it more believable that Lindsay had intentionally kept a low profile for an extended period. The news of Lindsay's disappearance alarmed everyone, despite the initial assumption that she was not the type to be concerned about. She was known for her modest lifestyle and never drank. Additionally, her husband had restricted her from having any contact with the outside world, including friends and acquaintances. Several inconsistencies in Mitchell's statement to the police raised suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would willingly let his wife leave, and that Lindsay would not abandon her children to a controlling husband. To clarify the situation, the police conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing all of Lindsay's acquaintances and searching for anyone who may have seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned their neighbors and obtained surveillance footage from the residential complex and surrounding areas. Lindsay's disappearance was not immediately noticed, and by the time it was. However, investigators later discovered that she was last seen in person on December 15th at the local post office, where she sent several letters and postcards. Her older sister confirmed that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. During their brief conversation over tea, Lindsay handed her sister a note and asked her to read it later. Unfortunately, the sister forgot about the note in her purse and was unable to find it later, leaving its contents a mystery. As the months passed, investigators grew increasingly suspicious that she was no longer alive, given her prolonged absence and lack of contact. Although they couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient evidence, their suspicions about him intensified as they learned more about their history and relationship. Lindsay's parents and detectives suspected Mitchell was involved in her disappearance, but lacked concrete evidence. Searches at their home and nearby turned up nothing. In a televised interview, Mitchell denied any wrongdoing, even claiming Lindsay's family would eventually apologize for suspecting him. Just before the holidays, Mitchell sent a postcard in hair dye to the lead investigator. The postcard's sarcastic message mocked the detective, implying he needed confidence and to cover his gray hair. This gesture showcased Mitchell's arrogance, despite portraying himself as a victim in the media. The investigation team held an interview to clarify some aspects of the case, but they didn't reveal all the details. They suggested that Mitchell Key, a well-known family man, was not what he seemed to be. In 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal when it was discovered that he had been forging his wife's signature to claim social benefits. Although this revelation indirectly supported the theory that he was involved in Lindsay's disappearance, the investigators had trouble making progress due to Mitchell's popularity. Many people defended him, arguing that as a single father, he needed financial assistance. Despite this, the detectives were able to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was found guilty and sentenced to a month of community service. Mitchell's situation took a turn for the worse. The forged signature of his missing wife raised more than a few eyebrows, and the public's outrage grew. As the criticism mounted, Mitchell's composure began to fray, and he lashed out at the media for invading his personal life. In a groundbreaking development, a visitor to an amusement park on June 1, 2000, stumbled upon a disturbing discovery that rekindled the Lindsay disappearance case. Their dog's strange behavior near the roller coaster led to the discovery of human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Lindsay, revealing she had been the victim of a violent crime. This breakthrough shifted the investigation's focus to finding the person responsible. On June 7th, Mitchell was questioned by detectives for over 36 hours, during which time he eventually cracked under the pressure and confessed to murdering and dismembering his wife. According to his testimony, Lindsay had asked for a divorce on December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister. This request enraged Mitchell, causing him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her body in their bedroom, taking steps to conceal the smell. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, Mitchell turned to his brother Elliot, a butcher, for assistance. Although Elliot was initially hesitant, Mitchell eventually convinced him to help. While their children played in the next room, the brothers dismembered Lindsay's body and later scattered her remains throughout the city. The murderer showed no remorse or empathy during his confession. Instead, he seemed to take pride in his actions, saying that without his confession, they would never have been able to prove his guilt. He then led the authorities to the locations where he had hidden the victim's body parts. Unfortunately, her head and one hand were never found. The forensic examination confirmed that all of those of Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Mitchell brothers took place in January 2001 and was a relatively straightforward process. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist observed that Mitchell displayed classic characteristics of a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. Elliot, Mitchell's brother, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in covering up the crime. Lindsay's children were taken care of by her grandparents, who gave them their last name. 3 months after the sentence, the Wilson family faced another tragedy when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the loss, took his own life in the family's attic. In his goodbye note, he expressed his desire to reunite with Lindsay, saying he saw no point in living in a world he considered cruel. As of 2017, Mitchell Key, Lindsay's murderer, became eligible for parole, but as of January 2023, his parole requests have been denied 3 times.